This is still in beta with a brand new episode about virtual airlines, the good, the bad, the ugly. With me as always are William and Sean. Hello you guys.
Hello.
Hello.
The three of us are very involved into the world of virtual airlines, and in this episode we would like to share our view on where they come from, what challenges they're facing, and where the future may take them. So, if you never heard about virtual airlines, what are they? Where do they come from? Are they for you? Is this just something weird for nerds, or is it really just open for everybody? What do you guys think?
I'd say it's definitely open for everybody. Particularly, I would say that there's a virtual airline for every particular, I don't know, version of the hobby. Be commercial, military, general aviation, bush flying. I'd say it's for everybody.
There's definitely something for everyone when it comes to virtual airlines. There's such a wide variety of concepts out there.
No,
Yeah, virtual airlines, if you never heard of them, are basically what it says. You join an airline that doesn't really exist. It may be based on a fictional one, it may be based on a real airline. Many are. And all of them have their own kind of concept and a set of rules and communities around them. And you can really feel like a real world pilot basically doing the job. And not just that, you will also learn quite a lot about flying because in many cases they have sort of a training program, or they have at least people who help you out with your questions, make you a better pilot. Sometimes it's just watching somebody else's stream because you're in a community and all that kind of stuff. So all three of us really like virtual airlines. Sean and I, we have our own. William basically inherited Metro Air, and we all work on that airline together. So we thought we could probably come up with some advice on what it takes to build a virtual airline, what you can expect from a virtual airline, what kind of challenges they're facing. Sean, you definitely did some research into that topic. Well, what's your take on this?
in regards to building a virtual airline.
Definitely, why not?
Okay, well, if you want to start there, which I'd say most people don't want to start their own virtual airline. They want to create, they want to join one. But if you did want to start one, it's actually not easy. The idea of it's easy. Pick some airplanes, some route, get some people together and fly them. But the technology that goes into running one, whether it be the website, ACAR system, painting, hosting these things, it's really a matter of your knowledge base on how to build a website. But there are alternatives out there to help you get started with that. Some easier than others. There's painting, which now you've got to deal with two, possibly three flight sims, depending on. It's funny, as I was actually just reading through the airlines that, or the flight sims that are supported by the definition of virtual airline. And I've actually pulled this off the Wikipedia page. And when we think of running a virtual airline, we think of painting or supporting P3D, X-Plane, or P3D and X-Plane, or FSX as well, for those who still fly that. And now soon to be 2020. But however, there is other alternatives out there for flight sims, according to this. I just thought I'd bring this up because I think it's hilarious. Flight Gear, never
Flight
heard of
View.
it.
Oh yeah, who remembers that one?
Flight Simulator 2004.
Excellent sim. Excellent sim.
2004, yeah, wasn't bad. Infinite Flight for mobile, which, okay.
I
YS
have
Flight,
that. I actually have the Infinite Flight for mobile. I mean, I haven't used it very much, certainly not very recently. But I know that it's been developed quite heavily in the last few years, and it seems to be getting better and better. So that's quite interesting.
So you're saying there are virtual airlines that are based on mobile.
actually, that has got quite, I won't say quite the following that the normal version of virtual airlines would be, a non-mobile version. However, yes, Infinite Flight, I do believe, is got some virtual airlines associated with it. I don't know if they're tied into the program. I'm not very familiar with that. I'd be interested to know more about that, just out of curiosity. I have no interest in flying mobile, but there are some others. GeoFS, which was apparently formerly Google Earth Flight Simulator, and RFS, which was Real Flight Simulator. It was just some flight simulators out there that I'd never even heard of. Interestingly, all we really know of is P3D X-Plane and now Flight Sim 2020, which get your pre-order on. However, to go back to kind of the challenges you face, and I think it's the topics of debate anyway, are the things that you've got to come up with for a virtual airline. The concept, is it passenger, cargo, both? Old school, which is kind of cool, like flying airplanes from the 80s and 90s. What kind of fleet and rank system you're going to have. which can cause issues. The platforms you support, balancing realism versus fun, and the challenges associated with building a community in general, but now in the virtual world.
Certainly a lot of challenges.
Absolutely.
That's the challenges if you want to make one, and I think you're very much right, especially when you look at the fictional airline world. You have a lot more challenges, I think, because as you said, the painting is a pain.
Can be.
Yeah, it can really be a pain because even if you have just one aircraft, let's say you have an airline with an A320, and you want to support all simulators out there, you would have to support FS9. That's a bunch of freeware models, maybe Project Airbus, which are not easy to paint. You have to support X-Plane, probably a freeware version as well as the payware version in an ideal world. You have to support FSX, you have to support P3D, and so on and so on and so on. So if you really want to cover everything, you have at least 3, 4, 5 paints to worry about. That is something we constantly struggle with because all our airlines are fictional, so we have to do a lot of paint work and sometimes just can't do things until these paints are done, which can take a while because not every one of us has the time to just sit down for hours and do these paints.
Having a staff that can help you with some of these things. If you're going to start an airline, you need people. You need smart people. You need someone that can do this or that, depending on the issues that you're going to run into. And then you got to pick your platform, and that's a whole nother, as far as what you're going to host your website, how you're going to do it.
And you've got to have the staff members or the people in the airline that actually own the planes that you're going to paint. Otherwise, it can start getting even more costly because you potentially are having to buy simulators or planes for the purposes of just painting, which makes it even harder. Which is where kind of the real world sort of virtual airlines don't have the same kind of challenges, because if you want to be an American Airlines virtual, there's literally thousands of planes out there that are already painted for every possible model and simulator under the sun, and it's somebody else's problem. You don't really have to worry about it.
Yeah, or it just comes with the plane anyway, so that's definitely an advantage. The only problem you might run into is that some airlines will shut you down if you run something with their name in it.
Yes, and logos and things.
Yeah, you have to be a bit careful about copyright and all that kind of stuff. So just in case you're out there, you're in the market of creating an airline, just be sure that you're doing it in a way that doesn't get you into trouble. When you're fictional, you have the paint job to do. When you're non-fictional, you might have to worry about, copyright or anything like that. I think Singapore Airlines is not very happy when you use their name for anything and they shut everybody down. And so just be careful with that. But on the other hand, if you're just looking to join an airline, there is quite a lot of challenges about that as well, because it turns out not every airline is the same.
No, in fact, I think if you're going to pick an airline, you need to pick it based upon what you want out of the airline. If you want strict realism, they exist. They'll deny your PIREP if you don't land in a certain feet per minute, or too much G-force or time in the flight sim not set correctly and such. You can get extremely strict. In fact, I used to fly for a virtual airline that required you to fly the flight in your sim your real world time, the time that you're in, what your sim had to be set to the bid. Well, if it's 2:00 in the morning, that means I got to fly that flight at 2:00 in the morning in my time. I mean, I don't typically do that.
Wow,
that's just great. Some of them you can only fly to places that you are set at. So if your hub is like, say, Miami or something, you can only fly flights in and out of Miami. Or some will even say that you fly a route, but then you have to fly the return, or you can't just hop around the network. You can't just move about wherever you feel like it. You've got to constantly come back to where you were before, and it just gets very complicated. And it kind of, I think, sometimes can take the fun out of it.
Yeah, but some people want that.
Well, yeah, some people do want that, and that's fair enough. But I think sometimes that's where that virtual airlines can start letting themselves down. They sort of get bogged down in too many details and too many rules and too many procedures, and it kind of loses the fun element of it. And you kind of lose the community because everybody's so fed up all the time, or nobody sticks around for very long because they sort of do half a dozen flights and get a couple denied or get messages or whatever, and they just think, oh, what's the point? I might as well go somewhere else. And that's why you do get a lot of pilots kind of hopping in and out of airlines. They'll come and try it for a few days or a couple of months, and then they'll move on to somewhere else. And you do get lots of pilots sort of dropping in and out of airlines quite frequently.
Yeah, that is a very good point. I think the barrier to entry is often very high because you come to a system that you don't have never used before. You sort of try to figure things out, and it may be too complicated. And then you get your flight in, and then it's rejected for some reason. It's just disheartening, and you move on. And there is no shortage, absolutely no shortage of virtual airlines out there. There is a lot of places you can choose from. I actually encourage people to find the place that fits them. I mean, I tried a lot of virtual airlines over the years. Some worked for me, others I was just trying a little bit and then away, and others I signed up, they looked good, and I never managed to do one flight simply because the system was too complicated, or I found out that everything is just so not my way. As you say, you can only take a flight from one place to another where your hub is or something. I can't deal with that. If I find out that an airline works like that, it's not for me. But it may be just the right thing for you because it makes you feel that much more realistically involved.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you find not only what works for you, but what's going to make you part of the community. That's one thing you might want to look for in a virtual airline is the community, which kind of brings me to one of the things that we kind of wrote down about this topic was, well, one of the things I think we should probably cover real quick is why this is on our channel. I think that a lot of the things that virtual airlines use, the planes that they use, the pilots that fly the planes that they have, a lot of those are in beta to some degree. They're not finished. They're expensive. So these are a lot of barriers that we run into when you run a virtual airline or when you're a part of it. I think both groups, whether you run it or fly for it, are stuck in the same boat of here's the airplanes, here's the sceneries, here's the programs, here's what's in beta, what's not, and trying to fight our way through all that. But regardless of that, is the community side of it, I do believe, is what's important. There's some airlines popping up out of the woodwork right now that I don't know what's spawning it. Maybe the buzz of 2020 is causing some more people to get involved in this hobby. Hopefully it does, and hopefully after 2020 comes out and it's not a flop, and people who are on Xbox, PC, people that have never flown or who have given up on the hobby for a while, it brings them back to it. But I'm seeing some virtual airlines pop up that are struggling a bit in technology. Weebly is a perfect example of this, which is a free website builder. I saw a couple of airlines too, at a minimum, that are using Weebly and Google Docs to kind of make it work. Here's a basic website. Here's your Google Doc to fill out your PIREP, and that's it. And at first, I kind of thought, "Wow, really?" But then I thought about it for a second. I said, okay, well, this person wants to create a virtual airline on it. And both of them, I believe, are fictional. They're not trying to, create a American virtual for no reason. There would be no point in that, in my opinion. But they're trying to create their own thing with their own ideas and their own airplanes and their own routes and their own paints. And I think that's very good. I think that's, come to think of it, that's what we need. We need some more ideas out there. But what I thought about was the website that they're using and the way in which they're doing it is not what's important. It's helpful to have a good website, have some good technology put into it, some scripts and a good ACAR system and everything that makes flying a little bit easier.
Well,
But
that basically helps bring more pilots in. I think the more professional your website looks, your liveries look, and how it all puts together. If you look professional, I think that can really help draw an audience in.
I would agree. It's a first impression. I agree with that. That's just like the paint. If you're a fictional virtual airline, I think your paint's kind of important because that's usually what people look at. It's the first thing people see, and the
Yeah.
rest of it comes later. If you're looking on Instagram for a virtual airline and you see a really cool paint, you will then go visit the website. You will then start learning about the community. So yes, I agree with you. But what I was getting at was, these people are trying to create a community. So if they don't have the greatest website. They don't have all that stuff behind it, but they're creating a community of friends that can go enjoy each other's time and fly together. And the rest of that's really not that important now that I think about it. However, I would recommend that these people go out and start learning some ways to make that a little bit better. Just obviously, you said for professional looking reasons, but also for integration so that you can do a bit more. If anything, there's a lesson to be learned for pilots who are listening to this is running a virtual airline is actually very complicated. To do it
Takes a
well,
lot of time and dedication.
well, the time and dedication, honestly, is not something that you will ever get paid for or ever get time back of, but you're doing it for other people.
It's a labor of love.
It is a labor of love. But regardless of that, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into some things that aren't so easy to do. It's not it's slowly becoming a market for this. You're starting to see things like VA base pop up where you can basically just use their API, pay for it, and you've got a virtual airline website up and running. In fact, I've used it; it's not bad, but you're limited to what you can do. And then there's the free PHP VMS, which is a fantastic system. Version 7's in beta, but I think it's a great system. I think it needs a little bit of work, but very
Speaking of
customizable.
free systems, there is also VAOS, Virtual Airline Operating System. So we include a link for both of them. So there are free ways you can do it.
I don't know anything about VAOS. In fact, if I saw a website that was running off of it, I wouldn't know.
I've seen a few, but it's not as popular as PHP VMS. But it's always nice that you have more than one option that's free.
Yep.
And as far as VA base goes, you pay for that. But there's also another service that's called virtualairlinesmanager.net. You can try that one as well. Again, nothing we say is sponsored. Go out, figure out if anything is for you.
No, VAM is free.
Is it? Okay. Yeah, I
VAM
think
is
both
free.
of them have free options, but you're very limited or something.
Well, the problem with VAM is I think it stopped getting official support from the developer. He got too busy.
Okay.
So I've looked at VAM before, and I thought it was a pretty cool looking system, just a little outdated and not up to speed. If it's not getting support and you don't know how to fix it, well, you're gonna have issues with that. But finding your way, there's actually like a guide out there to creating a virtual airline, and the first thing you need to do is come up with a concept. But like the second thing you need to do is figure out how you're gonna execute that concept. And if it comes down to a Weebly site in Google Docs, well, that's a good start, I suppose. What's important is you have a group of people that want to fly together, friends can hang out together, maybe even play different games together as you get to know each other. These things I think are more important than anything else. The website, while that is the hub of the virtual airline, should not be the main focus when it comes to what a virtual airline is. And it goes back to the rules, regulations, and all that really creates an offsetting environment. If all we care about is the look and not the community, that to me is very important. That's why I'm pretty lackadaisy about rules. To me, you do the best you can. You can't bash somebody for landing hard for multiple reasons. One might be their sim froze up or their frames drop or whatever it is. But for me, if I fly 5 hours and I have a good flight, but my landing's a little rough, over the maximum allowed landing limit, and you deny my pilot, that's 5 hours of my time that essentially won't go on any record being worth anything to the airline. And I have an issue with that. I think that there's too much that goes into what caused that issue. Yeah, if you're flying an older machine, we all know coming into an airport with a little bit of scenery loading up in an airplane that's already killing your frames to begin with, your landing rate's probably not going to be fantastic.
Yeah, very true.
So that's where I have a problem, because this is supposed to be a hobby. This is supposed to be getting yourself together with some of your free time to do something that you enjoy and fly. And then you get someone coming along telling you that the time you've spent wasted because you landed hard or you didn't load enough fuel or whatever it is that they may have. I just think that's where you start losing the element of fun, and that's where you start losing pilots. People start questioning, what is this all about? And that's when you'll get people moving on to another airline. And that's why you see so many pilots drop in and out of virtual airlines all the time.
Yeah, that is a very good point. I think the rules and regulations really can make or break an airline, and it's more about community than maybe some of the owners or operators of a virtual airline sometimes know. But another thing I noticed with some older virtual airlines is that they have a hard time adapting to new ways of communication. There is a not necessarily virtual airline out there. It's a sort of we band together and we're like a diehard community of pilots. And I noticed that their forums are not as active as they used to be. Also, they tried to move to Discord, but it really didn't work for them. While it worked really well for Metro Air, for example, I think this was the best thing we ever did for the community so far.
Definitely, 100%.
Other airlines just couldn't make that jump. It's just the kind of people in the airline. I mean, we've seen this with one of our members. He just said, no, he's not going to make that jump, and he left the airline for that. And that's okay. But if you have a majority of people not willing to do this, but also not really using the forums anymore, it just dies. And slowly but steadily, it just dries up. Many people move on, new people won't join, and all that's left is basically a core of people who every now and then share a bunch of screenshots, and that's pretty much it. I mean, that's probably a bit hard on it, but in essence, that's what happens.
Well, I think people do go in and out of flight simming phases. I know I've done it before where I had to take took a few years off. My PC at the time really didn't do very well with FSX, which, it wasn't until I finally got into X-Plane that I started enjoying the hobby again because I was so done with FSX after many years of struggling with the program. But I think people do fall in and out of love with the hobby, and I think they in and out of communities. I mean, I've been in Metroware for to over 10 years, I think, somewhere in there, and I've seen the same faces come and go over the years. They leave, they come back, they leave, they come back. And I don't think it's an issue of the airline. I think it's their personal lives take over and they don't have time for it, or whatever it might be, and that's fine. It's understandable. We're here for that. But yes, I do agree that there is a transition again, kind of back to the platforms and what we use to make the community work, via website and things like that. I do think there is a progression that will have to continue as technology grows. I think Discord's a fantastic tool for any type of community like this because you can place things in a text version, you can talk in person, you can share your screens, you can share video. It's just a great place, and I think it works great for virtual airlines. Forums, yeah, they're good out there too, but I just don't necessarily think that's the. I mean, forums and TeamSpeak used to be what virtual airlines used for everything. And it's if you can combine everything into one and just make it so much simpler, I think the pilots, for the most part, like it.
You're
And
starting to see a decline in forums sort of across the board, really.
yeah, I think they're good for things like development. Yeah, whether it be aircraft and like X-Plane, for example, has the X-Plane forums and everything, and it's good because it's always there, and I don't have to hunt and peck for it. I can easily search, and I know all these independent developers tend to have their own discords as well, but I prefer forums in that respect. But yes, generally they are dying. But for what we do, I think Discord is a good program. And TeamSpeak costs money now to have a license and everything, and it's just such a pain.
Well, we may not be safe from that on Discord. I mean,
No,
they want to make some money maybe in the future. And one thing I'm kind of missing about Discord is a clone that's open source that works. I mean, I tried one and it just isn't there. But yeah, for now, it's the best tool we have. And I highly recommend anybody who wants to start any community, just go on that and don't look back. The forums are dead, really.
Yeah.
Because what I hate so much about forums is you have to sign up with an account. Then, at least in my case, that means I have to create an email first, I have to store the password somewhere, and so on and so on. And it's just annoying. While on Discord, I say, oh, here's a link, click, done, in. You can talk to people face to face. Well, face to face, I mean, in a voice channel. And you can write and discuss things in certain channels. It's a bit like a wonderful mixture of forums, chat rooms, and voice over IP. It really works for that.
Kind of all rolled into one, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it really helps a virtual airline in particular to really sort of come together. Virtual airlines are such a global undertaking. We're an American airline. I mean, Metro is anyway. And we have pilots from all over the world. And Discord really helps us getting together, all of us, and really just talk as if we were in the same room.
It brings the community together and it helps build that community.
Yeah.
It helps you expand and enjoy group flights together and kind of get together just for hanging out of an evening and talking about flight sim and general discussions, and it's just great fun.
Yes, it is. But that's only one tool in this whole tool chain. That tool it works. It's definitely not in beta, I think. It's one of the best tools out there I've seen in a long time. But there are other tools that are still sort of still in beta. Like, it's very difficult to find an A-curse that doesn't, I'm sorry to say this, that doesn't suck. I feel so strongly about this that I actually went out and built my own A-curse because I couldn't deal with anything that's on the market. It's not for everybody, obviously, but I think the A-curse systems need improvement. Also, if you look at PHP VMS, yeah, it's relatively simple, but you still need to have some web hosting, maybe. Maybe you can have it in the cloud somewhere as well, I don't know. But at least if you want to do it yourself, you need to order some web hosting, you need to put it on there somehow. If you don't have like deeper knowledge about how to do this can be quite daunting. Then you have to go through the installation process with databases and everything.
Yeah.
Again, can be super easy if you know what you're doing. But again, if you do this for the first time, it can be incredibly difficult, and I get that. Then there's also updates. And one of our pilots who went on to do his own airline, great airline by the way, he just couldn't update for some reason, and or something didn't work and he had to update and had to figure out how to do the upgrade. And it's just not easy to do. And I think what's missing there in this modern world is something like we've seen in SimBuddy. That was a good approach to that, to say, okay, here we have a cloud-based account that allows you to open your own virtual airline or join virtual airlines as you please. And you can basically set it up how you like it. Now that is a dead project, but I think this is something we might see again in this segment as a new tool that would help people to just move away from I have to do everything myself or I have to pay like one place and live with that particular place's rules.
Because SimBuddy was such a great program, and it's a shame that it didn't last, but it was a great program, and it really did kind of bring a new aspect to flight sim, and it's kind of a bit sort of FS passengers kind of thrown in as well.
Yeah, it was not just for VAs, it was for pilots as well. And the VA part was just another part of the whole system. It was really big and it's a shame it's gone. But this is where I see it could be much easier for people who want to join or create their own airline. And Sean, you tried one of the commercial options, I think VA base. How did that go for you?
Well, it was roughly about, I want to say, 40 to 50 US dollars a year. This is a paid option, obviously, for the rights to use their API for building your own virtual airlines website. It was actually all right. I felt like it wasn't done. Of course, what is?
Still in beta.
Yeah, it was still in beta. So it had the functionality of building routes and fleets and members could join and all that. So all that worked fine. But when it came down to truly customizing and personalizing the airline the way you want it to, it was a really big pain. Done in PHP. So, anybody that's ever created anything, PHP is a big pain. Unfortunately, for some reason, it's very common in the virtual airline world. Almost every website's using it to some degree, not necessarily PHP VMS, but they're using the PHP language. It wasn't bad. I think after looking at the freeware alternatives, such as PHP VMS, was free. All I have to do is have my own hosting. However, I now have to have more knowledge. And that's where VA base works great for people who maybe don't know how to do all these things like create databases and stuff like that and put it all in and make it all work. So they could just get VA base. You do need the hosting. You upload a few files, you put in your API key, and you're good to go. Problem with that is you don't own your own data. You can't edit any sort of database entry if something goes wrong. You have to submit a ticket. Hopefully they fix it, which there was multiple times they did not answer me. So I prefer just to have it all myself so I can edit it myself if something goes wrong. Plus I can upgrade and downgrade and fix things and add things, subtract, all that stuff because it's mine. It's my data. I think VA Base is a great starter and it'll get you kind of acquainted with what coding and stuff is about to make minor changes. But if you want to do something, you're going to have to do it yourself. You're going to have to learn it and it's going to be a little bit more work, but you will much more appreciate it afterwards because you can actually work on the stuff that you want to work on and not be held by somebody else's design, I suppose. But I am seeing a lot more VA based airlines out there, and they all look the same generally because the format's all laid out the same. You can minor tweak it yourself to make it a little bit different, and they're running and they're great. And they got members, so that's great. It's working for them, and hopefully one day the owner, if he decides he wants to progress more, will switch over to something or build his own, whatever it takes. It does come with its own ACAR system, so that's kind of nice. I know not the greatest, but it wasn't terrible. I know there's no pleasing you, Roman, when it comes to an ACAR system,
No, there's no pleasing me.
but it wasn't terrible. So I will say VA base. I won't talk bad about it, other than it was pricey, pretty pricey.
The Acres is borderline horrible, but anyway.
Borderline horrible. Anyways, that's my take on building an airline. There's so much involved. For those who are listening who don't have any interest in building an airline, but are in those airlines, just remember there's a lot of things that go behind making it all work, and we can't always necessarily do everything immediately, and we try. And there's a lot of things that go behind the scenes to make it all work. Not to mention the cost. There could be costs associated with this too.
Yeah, there's always cost associated. Even if the software doesn't cost you anything, you still need hosting or maybe a domain and stuff like that.
Right.
So there's always at least, maybe you can get by with $100 a year, but probably it's more like a few $100s a year.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to please everybody, but I think that's the mark of a good airline is when they continue to try and evolve and don't get stuck too deep in the past. You kind of got to keep moving along with the times. You've got to keep things active. You've got to keep introducing things to keep people, keep your pilots, interested, because there's no point just sort of getting stagnant. And that's, Metro once got into a stage where it was stagnant, and we did start to see a decline, and that's when we kind of kicked ourselves back into shape, and we kind of picked ourselves back up again in the last few years. So certainly, virtual airlines have got to kind of always got to update, always got to upgrade. But that's when it kind of takes time, because that's where you need staff to actually help out, to kind of get involved and do things. Because if the staff are doing things, the staff are around getting involved, then the pilots get involved. And I think it's getting the right combination, keeping things moving.
Touching on a very good point here, that staff is extremely important. I mean, as I mentioned in the intro, I also have a virtual airline, which is more like a test bed for other things at the moment. I mean, obviously, it should one day rise to become its own independent thing. But in the end, I'm the only staff member there. I have a bunch of pilots who just appeared out of nowhere. Thank you if you're listening. I appreciate you. In general, it's mostly like I'm flying, I'm building some stuff, and that's pretty much it. It's a bit of a ghost town. While Metro has all of these projects going on. The whole idea of this staffless VA, I had that before. It's a pipe dream. You need people, if only to engage in the community, to come up with new ideas, to criticize the concepts that are already there. Because if you're the only one making decisions, your airline will probably be as boring as you can be. And most people, including me, we're not as interesting on our own. We thrive when we exchange ideas, when we come up with new stuff. Always listen to community. It's a big thing, and have staff members who help out, if only by just coming up with new routes, adding new planes or whatever. Just helping you with new ideas. I think that's really important. That's something a good airline should always have. At least 2-3 staff members to begin with.
I think it's important that pilots do the same. So my little project I'm doing is really based on what the pilots want, because I don't really necessarily stick to some sort of realistic model. Try to stick to a reasonable fleet. Well, one, because it helps to be somewhat realistic, but two, there's too many airplanes out there to buy and paint. It's just ridiculous. But if you're a pilot, instead of going and finding a virtual airline, if you're already in one, instead of going and finding another one that's doing something that you want, maybe see if the one that you're in can accommodate. I don't see a whole lot of suggestions in the world of virtual airlines from pilots saying, "Hey, can we fly here, or can we consider this or consider that?" And on the flip side of that, the virtual airline cannot be so quick to dismiss these ideas. If it doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense, but think about it for a bit. If it's doable, if they're asking to take A380 in a state bars, yes, I get it. I can't do that. But if it's a reasonable route with a reasonable airplane that you already have or something, if you can accommodate these things, it'll keep people around a bit more. And kind of like you were saying, Roman, if maybe you just didn't think of it and somebody else just did think of it for you, and they can give you that idea. And how hard is it to implement something just to keep people happy and keep it fresh? And now you've got to do destination that you've never flown to before. I think these things, granted, could come from staff members, but I think they can come from pilots as well. If you have some sort of suggestion box or pilots, I think it's important that you make your airline better. If you have an idea, submit it. And it may not happen right away, depending on what it is, particularly if we're talking like adding aircraft or something, but maybe you get the discussion going and people start talking about it and creating these ideas and things. It's such a great thing because it's virtual. We can do anything we want. Unless you're mimicking real world operations of an airline, then right now you're not flying anywhere and you have like 3 airplanes to choose from, then that sucks. But when you're in a virtual fictional community, you can do whatever you want to do. And I think that is so important, and I'm glad to see these airlines popping up that I've never heard of before, using what primitive ways they can to get moving. But that means somebody's trying something different, and it's just, there's no reason why we shouldn't. We can come up with any idea we want, and we can implement it within reason, because it's what we have, it's whatever we want. And today's time is so much better. I mean, we've got these different flight sims. People choose which way they want to go. That's fine. And if we can accommodate both, that's great. But with the different sceneries that are out there and different aircraft that support them, we can do and the add-ons now that we're starting to see with like self-loading cargo and packs and things like that to add a bit more realism to them. And we start integrating all these things in, it just changes everything. The realism of it. Virtual airlines are starting to do some funny things now, like add menus or these little things just to kind of add a little bit more realism to them. And then if you take that menu that airline created and somehow maybe work it into a paint kit inside the seat back of the aircraft, we're starting to think outside the box now. We're starting to think about ways to make things a little bit more realistic, more immersive, and it just keeps the idea tank going. And now that 2020 is coming out, with the multiplayer aspects of it hopefully being great, and maybe I don't want to say get rid of VATSIM because I'd probably be, you know, somebody be coming after me for that. I do like VATSIM. I just think the VATSIM platform needs so much work to make it.
That's a different episode in itself.
It is. It is. I'm not ragging on VATSIM, but goodness, could you imagine if we all flew the same sim using the same world with the same aircraft for the most part, or there was some sort of proper model matching being done for those who have the payware and those who don't? Just imagine that. Just think about how cool that would be and how much easier it would be to do all these things that we like to do. So keep the ideas going.
Just sort of going back to one of your points that just before we sort of straight into VATSIM there. I think this is where virtual airlines, which are based on a fictional airline, kind of come into their own because they have more of a blank canvas to do what they want. If you're being a Delta or an American or whatever, you're kind of governed by what those airlines are doing in real life, their routes and their aircraft. And aircraft and aviation is kind of, in some ways, in right now, is becoming a bit boring because everything's a 787 or an A350 because money talks, and basically all the airlines are moving into these ultra modern airplanes, and you're kind of losing these older, more sort of interesting classic planes like the 75s, the 76s, your 74s. Whereas in these fictional airlines, you can kind of continue those traditions and kind of have that airline of the 90s, or kind of mix your fleets up a little bit more. And that's where there's a bit more excitement, I think, and that's sort of the edge, I think, for the fictional virtual airlines kind of over the real ones.
There are great resources for airlines that base it off real world operation. There's I can't remember the name of it, that provide you the routes. You pay them monthly. They provide you the routes.
Yeah, they have up-to-date schedule lists and everything. It's not super expensive, but you still got to pay a fair amount. I forgot the name as well. If I find it, I'll put it into the show notes. I hope I can accommodate you. But there are tools and things out there, but you still need to be able to integrate that. It's again not the easiest thing in the world probably if you don't know, programming and stuff.
Well, if you want to start an airline, Google how to start a virtual airline. There's actually a lot of good resources out there. If you want to join one, Google it. There's also a lot of good resources out there. There's articles that come out every year about the best virtual airlines that are out there. Make sure it is based on what you're looking for, not based on how many pilots they have, the fleet that they fly, and the paint on the side of the airplane. Factor in some other things such as read their handbook, read their rule book. See if it's for you. See if they require anything that you can't do, or maybe they don't have something that you want. So if you do want that strict realism, there are airlines out there for it. If you want some more laid back, you can pick it up really easily by reading their handbook. And then, yes, hopefully the fleet is accommodating to what you want. Just do your research. Don't be discouraged by joining an airline that you didn't understand what was going on, and now you've entered a community that's either toxic or just not conducive to what you're looking to do. But yes, there's plenty of resources out there. If you want to create an airline, feel free to message me. I'll show you some things that I've learned over the years to create one. I've been at it for about a year and a half, 2 years now. Metro has a lot of good smart people in it too. I don't discourage anyone from creating an airline. In fact, if you're going to leave my airline to go create your own, I think that's a great thing, because that means the community is still going to keep building. To me, it's not about numbers. You can have 10 pilots, you can have 10,000 pilots, but to me, it's I'd rather have the 4 quarters over the 100 pennies. Meaning, if I have a good group of people that I like hanging out with, the amount of people is irrelevant. I like to see people create things because it
Quality
inspires me
over
to create.
quantity.
And that's the cool thing about our hobby, is generally most people are mature. I think this, particularly in the commercial side of it, this type of hobby requires a more mature player base because of the things you need to understand and learn in order to do it. It's not a game that you can just hop in, press a button, and go flying. There's so much more to that in order to do it, particularly, like I said, on the commercial side, that you have to learn, and by learning it, it's fun to learn it and do it and make it work. But I think we're blessed with a player base that is generally more mature, can get along with people, and makes running the virtual airlines a lot easier as opposed to running a daycare like some gaming communities can be. So we're kind of blessed with that. So, as time goes on, I think that can only get better based on what we're seeing out there now, because things are, I think 2020 is going to be an interesting, next month it launches. And is it going to be perfect when it comes out? No, it's shocking. It's the NDA here. I've seen some things recently that make me wonder how are they going to fix that in 30 days-ish. That part I'm not hung up on yet. I do think it's getting released a bit early, and I don't want to go into this completely. This is the wrong episode for this. I do think it's getting released a bit early based on the fact that it's going in beta in a couple days, but here's your hard release date. I don't like betas that have a hard release date following them because I don't think that gives you enough time to actually address the major, and I'm
How
talking
can you
major
fix
issues.
everything? Yeah,
Yeah,
how
well,
can
I
how
don't.
can you fix it in 30 days?
I can't expect something like that to have everything fixed in any reasonable amount of time, but the major issues are the ones that would concern me that need to get resolved before it gets released. Because what happens when you release something half baked? People get the wrong idea, people don't like it, people won't buy it, return it, start the word gets out. Now suddenly you're a trash developer. That's why I think it's important. But you know how money
Damaging.
goes. They need to make their money. I think with that coming, it's already starting to create some buzz around, just more around the virtual airline worlds. If we can make that world a bit smaller, that would be great. We can bring it in to one flight sim that's really got everything we want in it. We can reduce costs and time. So, anyways, I think there's a lot around it, and I think it's going to be good. I think that we have a lot of good things coming, and I think it's important that we keep evolving. And I think that's the biggest part about a virtual airline. I'll leave it at this: is that they keep evolving. Don't sit down and get stagnant, and don't turn away any idea that somebody gives you, because you never know how popular that idea is going to become amongst all the other people who don't speak up, who are wanting the same thing. I think that's very important.
Absolutely, 100%. I agree with it.
I think that wraps it up
Yeah.
pretty well. Let's sum it up. Virtual airlines are mostly about the community in our eyes. There's lots of tools out there, most of which are not perfect, so they all require some work or they limit you in some way. There's no perfect tool to do it all, but even if you have no tools whatsoever, just go out there and do it. And if you are looking to join a virtual airline, well, look at the concept, look at the community, look at the rules. Is it for you? Don't go buy pretty paint or just a fleet, because there's always another virtual airline that flies your plane, and that may be much more accommodating to your needs.
Absolutely. Yep. And to tie it back into why it's still in beta, well, it's because everything in a flight sim world is still in beta. So um, there's communities still in beta. There are the software they're using to run those communities are still in beta to some degree, because the development will hopefully continue carrying on. PHP VMS is a perfect example of that. It never stops. It continues growing. So it's always still in beta, but that's okay. It's a still in beta worth investing time into. Plus, it's free. So yes, I think it's very important that there is a reason why it's on this channel. It's because there's so much involved with it, whether it be it you're running it or you're part of it. We're all still part of this world that is still developing.
It's
Some in a good
constantly
way.
changing.
It's constantly changing. Some in a good way, some in not such a good way. Some that cost you more money for less. Some that you get your money worth. It's back to everything else. You got to do your research. So just like you're going to buy an airplane, well, when you join a community, do your research first. I think that's very important. That way you don't get discouraged.
Amen.
Amen, indeed.
So what are we going to talk about next week, William?
So next week we're going to talk about sceneries. We've talked about planes in the past. This time we're going to take a look at some of those scenery developers out there, the good ones, the bad ones, and the ones that rip us off. So you'll have to wait and see what we have in store for that one.
Will we be hearing about Orbix?
We may well hear about Orbex.
So if you want to know what William has to say about Orbex and sceneries in general, well, tune in next time. I'm not going to say next week because we skipped last week. Sorry about that. But if you did like this episode, like it. And if you didn't do so already, please subscribe. Much appreciated. And hear you next time.